Here we have the Midas Neutron DSP engine, as well as the brand new Midas Neutron NB card. I'm going to be covering how to install the NB card into the Neutron DSP engine. Down in front here, I do have two CM1 card slots that you are able to install in the NB card. Here are our status indications for the Ethernet tunnel. So if we were using the Ethernet tunnel between the DSP engine and the console surface, we'd be able to make sure our connections are working. Next, we have our system clock indicating our master and our slave status. Below that, we have our indicator lights for the power supply unit of the actual Neutron. Next, we have our snake connections for our X and Y, either on copper, Cat5, or our fiber optical connections. Below that, we have our sync source, indicating if we have the internal clock, the external word clock, or the external AES3. Below that are our 4 DSP card status light indicators, as well as all of the status roles of the DSP cards. On the top right, we have the 8 AES50 indication lights. These are for the actual 8 AES50 ports that are on the actual Midas Neutron. And finally, we're left with the last 2 status windows. These are associated for the Neutron NB card. I'm going to jump down to the bottom here. For the I/O card audio expansion, those 8 LEDs are associated to the 8 AES50 ports on the bottom portion of the Neutron NB card. Now, we'll move over to the I/O card audio, where the status lights for 1 and 2 are associated to the 2 additional AES50 ports, giving us a total of 10 on the Neutron NB card. 3, 4, and 5 are associated to Module 1 for our CM1 cards, and then 6, 7, and 8 are for Module 2 of our CM1 cards. Next, we're going to go over the connections to the Midas Neutron DSP engine. For you existing 3, 6, and 9 users, you notice that this looks very, very familiar to the DL3, 7, and 1. For you folks that are new to Midas, we're going to go over the connections in depth. Next, we have our 8 AES50 ports. These are going to give us the connections for our I/O boxes. Next, we have an Ethernet tunnel. This will allow us to be able to plug in from front of house to be able to actually talk down the Ethernet line to, say, the monitor engineer that's on stage. Next, we have our X and Y snake connections. Both feature a copper connection for our Cat5e on a Neutrik Ethercon connector, or just the regular standard Cat5 cable. Below that, we have our optical connections, or fiber for multimode, on a Neutrik Opticon Duo connector. This is how you actually make the connections between the console surface and the Neutron DSP engine. Here you see I'm plugging in the optical cables into X and Y on the back of the control surface. You can go ahead and use the copper ports for the Cat5e or a combination of both. Next, we have our AES3 sync. This will allow us either to send out or receive sync information from external devices. Here, we have our 75 ohm word clock connections. Both the input and the output feature BNC style connections. In the past, I used to use an external clock on my Midas 3, 6, and 9 with the DL3, 7, 1, and did have a significant improvement in the audio quality and the function of the console. Once I transferred over to the Midas Neutron DSP engine, I took the clock in and out of circuit and did not notice any difference in the audio quality. That's because the Neutron engine features a very, very high quality internal clock. So I would suggest letting the Neutron DSP engine handle all of the clocking for the entire system. And last, we have our control expansion ports. There's 2 on the back. These are not something that we really need to be worried about. This is more for the service side of things when they need to do any type of updating or diagnostic of the Neutron DSP engine. On the left here, we have 3 universal power supply units, allowing us to use the Midas Neutron anywhere in the world. This unit only requires 2 to run at any given time. The third one is a redundant, so if any of the 3 were happen to go down, we would get a caution warning on the console to let us know that one of the power supply units is down. These are easily to be able to be swapped out, and just so you know, you can actually use the same ones on the ProX Surface. Next, we have a blank plate over where the Neutron NB card is going to be installed into. Next, we have our 4 DSP cards. These are the workhorses for the entire ProX system. Down here we have the status indicators for our DSP audio, as well as status lights for our DSP control. And we have our diagnostic ports. This is not something that we need to be worried about. This is more for the service technicians to be able to diagnose the DSP cards. Here, I'm going to show you how to install CM1 cards into the two CM1 card slots on the Neutron NB. Here, I have the KT AES50 card, as well as the KT Dante 64. There's several other cards that are available, and the installation procedure is the same for all of the cards. So let's go ahead and do that. To install the CM1 cards in, we need just one tool, our T10 tool. Now, I'm removing the screws on the 4 threaded posts. This is where the card's going to be secured to. I also need to remove the 4 screws on the front that have our blanking plates. Now, let's put the CM1 card in. You have to be very careful that the male pins on the circuit board in the Neutron are going to go in and line up perfectly with the female side of the CM1 card. The best way to line up the CM1 card is to get the 2 mounting holes on either side of the CM1 card lined up and then firmly press down, ensuring a tight fit. We're going to do the same thing with the second CM1 card. Now we can take the mounting screws and place them into the mounting holes on the cards. Let's not tighten them down all the way until we get the 4 screws on the front locked in place. Now that I have all the screws in, I'm going to go ahead and now tighten them down firmly. Be careful not to apply too much pressure. Now that we have our 2 CM1 cards installed into the NB card, we're ready to remove the back panel to access to install the NB card to the DSP engine. Most importantly, you'll notice that I have all of the mains disconnected for safety. So please go ahead and make sure that you do that as well. We need to remove the rear blank plate. We'll take our T10 and remove the 4 screws to access the panel. Now we're ready to put the card inside the DSP engine. We have to be extremely careful because there are pins at the bottom of the DSP that are going to go into the back of the NB card, and we got to make sure that we're not going to damage those. As we situate the card, there are 2 tracks, as you see here, that we're going to go ahead and put the card into to be able to guide the card into place to ensure proper connection. As we get the card right here towards the end, and we know that it's in the track, we go ahead and simply push on that, and we notice that this tab comes up to let us know that the card is properly seated. Now that the card is in place, we can go ahead and put our 4 screws back inside the chassis. Now that we have our Neutron NB card installed into the Neutron DSP engine, our next step is to update the firmware not only of the Neutron with the card, but as well as all of the components that make up our ProX system, including any I/O boxes. Because this video is covering hardware connections only, you're going to find a separate video with the step-by-step procedure of how to do the firmware updates of our ProX system. Just before we make our I/O box connections, I took out my 451 and my 151 I/O boxes out of the rack to give you a closer look at the back of the units. So let's take a look at it. As you can see, the 451 is a 3-card modular I/O system, which means we can configure the I/O as we see fit. In my setup, I have 8 analog inputs, 8 analog outputs, as well as 8 channels of AES EBU in and out. The 15 series is a fixed format I/O. The 151 is 24 analog inputs. Let's quickly go over the back of the units. Both I/Os feature universal power supplies, so this way we could use the I/O boxes anywhere in the world. On the 451, we next have 2 DB25s that we could use for our GPIO connections. After that, we have our MIDI in, out, and through ports. Next, we have our USB ports. Following that, we have our Ethernet control for X and Y. And last, we have our X and Y AES50 snake ports. On the 151, we first have a diagnostics port. This is not something that we need to be too concerned about. After that, we have our Ethernet control. And finally, our snake connections for X and Y. Next, I'm quickly going to show you how to install one of the cards into the modular I/O unit. It's the same exact procedure on putting a card into any of the 3, 6, and 9 or ProX control surfaces. So let's check that out. When you get your 451 or any of the modular I/Os, if it's not already fitted with the cards, normally you're going to find a blank plate that's on the back of the slot. To remove the blank plate, there's 2 screws on either side of where the card's going to be installed. So with the blank panel removed, we're ready to put the card in. Again, you have to be very, very careful to make sure that the card is lining up with the guide tracks on both sides to ensure a proper connection. Let's go ahead and slowly put the card in. Once the card's in, we're firmly just going to make sure that the card is locked in place into the pins. Now we can go ahead and replace our screws. And a reminder, we're using T10 screws. Here we are on the back of the Surface. This is going to be the same procedure for the Pro 3, 6, 9, and ProX consoles. So let's go ahead and remove the blank plate. Okay, now that we have the blank plate removed, we can go ahead and insert the first I/O card. You got to keep in mind that you have to line up the card inside the guide tracks on the side so that way the card can insert properly. Once we have the card almost all the way in and we confirm that the card is still in the slots, we can then press firmly in and we can feel the card slide gently into place. Now, we can return all of the surface mount screws to make sure that the cards don't come out or get loose. Now we're ready to make the connections. Here we have the 151 I/O box, the DN9680 that's on the stage side, as well as our Neutron DSP engine with our 8 AES50 ports, as well as our Neutron NB card that has our 10 additional AES50 ports. Now, for our DN9680 here at the stage, we have signals coming down the optical cable from the DN9680 at front of house. So I'm going to go ahead and match those same connections from front of house into the Neutron NB card. So let's start with AES port 1 on the DN9680. And then I'm going to match it up to port 1 on the NB card. Just so you know, you do not have to use just these 8 AES50 ports. You could also utilize 1 and 2 on the top side of the card. So now that we have all of our I/O box connections made and our 2 DN9680s are connected and the control surface is connected to the Neutron DSP engine, I have one more connection to make. From my RPM Dynamics MS48, I'm going to be plugging in a VGA and a USB cable onto the back of the control surface into the KVM port. Now that we have these connections made, we're ready to go ahead and power up the system.